has been a hot minute, ladies and gentlemen. A lot has transpired since I started editing the Mechanical Titan of Terror episode of the Idea Arena series. So you can probably surmise from that statement that this episode is being recorded in the past, and you would be correct. This video is being recorded in the past, and if you have at all been paying attention to any of the personal anecdotes that I leave in these videos, you know that 2024 wasn't exactly the best year for me. But the short version of all of that is that at the time of recording this video, I seem to have a new job lined up. I have absolutely no idea how that's going to go, and frankly, I do not know what my kind of personal time at work versus at home balance is going to look like when all is said and done. So I am not particularly certain as to what uploads are going to look like and at what rate they are going to come out once I start this new job. Given that I am recording so far in the past, I cannot say for certain how much exposure this channel is going to get and the kind of trajectory of its view counts and my subscriber count and, you know, all the attendant engagement that comes with both of those things. Unfortunately though, as much as I would wish to be able to just continue to churn out content twice a week in perpetuity, I do not think that is going to be sustainable under the life schedule that I will probably end up with as a result of this job. That also assumes that I do not lose this job particularly fast. I've only held 2 jobs in my life so far. The one that I had in high school and into college, and the first professional one that I left in March of 2024. Both stints at both companies ended up amounting to 4 years plus in terms of total duration at each. So given that track record, I cannot be so sure that I will have a lot of time to waste in my day-to-day life such that I will be able to continue rigorously uploading content for public digestion. I am saying all of this at the beginning of the video because given that I have probably talked about this already in future videos that I will be recording in the future for me but will technically have come out in the past for you, I just want everyone to be caught up to speed on kind of what is happening in my life at the time of recording this video. So with all of that out of the way and having been said, obviously you clicked on this video because it is a new episode of the Kingdom of Crap mini-series on the Godzilla Brawler YouTube channel, wherein I cover the first ever IDW comic for Godzilla, written by Eric Powell and Tracy Marsh, Godzilla Kingdom of Monsters. And we have covered quite a lot of material in the previous episodes of this particular mini-series. And I have said that there is one other character slash pairing of characters that I wish to discuss because they were probably the most well-written characters presented to us originally within Godzilla Kingdom of Monsters. Introduced in Kingdom of Monsters issue 3, for which this cover is the cover art for, drawn by Jeff Zorno, who, it must be said, must be destroyed, was the pairing of characters referred to as Minette and Mallory. And just before I really get into it, I don't know if it has ever been made quite clear which one is which. They refer to each other in the dialogue within the Godzilla Kingdom of Monsters comic, but based on the artwork, I have no idea which one is which, so they're basically monolithic in my mind, so don't hate me too much for not differentiating between the two. As far as I'm concerned, they're basically the same character, just slightly different, you know? Anyway, so issue 3 opens on these 2 very eerie-looking, black-haired young girls, school children, sitting outside of some institution. And through the dialogue between some woman who we never learn the name of and some superintendent principal that we never learn the name of.
Superintendent Chalmers, welcome. I hope you're prepared for an unforgettable luncheon.
We learn that these 2 girls, whose names we do not yet know, are attempting slash being argued on behalf of to be admitted to some French educational institution. And the gentleman, who I presume is, I'm just going to call him the principal, he doesn't show up past this short exchange at the beginning of the issue, so I apologize to all the French that I offend. Please tell me what the name of this particular role would be. But basically, the woman who is arguing on behalf of Minette and Mallory, says they've been causing issues with other children, and the principal shoots back, kids can be so cruel. Are they disruptive? Do they spread rumors? And this is kind of a follow-up to the first thing that the principal said that I skipped over, which is that this is apparently the third school that these two girls have been to or applied for entrance to inside of 6 months. And so the principal is confused, like, you know, what's the problem? And then at the bottom of that page, there's a very menacing panel where Minette and Mallory, the names of whom we have not yet been disclosed, are just like peering into the camera. Now, before I really get off to the races on many of the characterization details of Minette and Mallory, I feel it is worth noting that Minette and Mallory are French.
Oh, what kind of dog is he?
He's French. With...
I do not know how to pronounce the name of the region of France that this school ostensibly takes place in / is located in. It's in Normandy, in France. But it is worth noting that of all the countries that the Godzilla franchise has a storied history with characters from, it's France. Now, I do want to bring this up because the YouTube channel known as Pointless Hub, who is very entertaining, did a very good video on the 1998 American Godzilla movie, and in that movie, obviously, he had to talk a lot about the French because they are massively involved in the plot for that movie. He made a joke about it in the video, and I looked it up just before recording this video, but if you don't believe it, the United States of America may have conducted approximately 100 nuclear tests in the Pacific, but France actually conducted closer to, though not exactly, 200. So, in a sense, even though I think it makes more sense that Godzilla should have been birthed from the United States testing things in the Pacific Ocean, as that ties more directly into the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and thus ties in more thematically with Godzilla and what he was kind of created in response to. But the fact that the 1998 Godzilla movie included the French and focused on them so heavily was not completely unfounded in historical reality. So the fact that Minette and Mallory are from France should not go unnoticed. The only other characters of note in the Godzilla franchise that have been French are quite obviously Philippe Roche, as well as the spiritual successor character for Philippe in the Godzilla the Series cartoon that preceded it, Monique Dupré. I know technically there were a lot of tertiary Frenchmen that surrounded Philippe during Godzilla 1998, but for all intents and purposes, they basically were not actual characters, so they are not worth bringing up. But before Minette and Mallory, Philippe and Monique were the only French characters of any note in the Godzilla franchise, and they were / are both protagonists. Good guys. So I just wanted to get that out of the way because that feels like something noteworthy about Minette and Mallory. Before I get back to the serious discussion of the twins in question, it must be said there needs to be fan art made by a professional artist of Monique Dupré in a French flag bikini. I can't be the only one, right? So anyway, getting off of that subject, Minette and Mallory are French, but through that dialogue that I read a second ago, it is clear that Minette and Mallory are troublemakers.
You looking for trouble?
Are you a troublemaker? Is that what you are?
You making trouble? Yeah, I'm a troublemaker. I'm making trouble.
But a few pages later in the comic, when Minette and Mallory get reintroduced to us, they are watching a number of their peers, a number of the other school children playing what I, as an American, would call soccer, but what they, presumably as Europeans, would call football. And one of the kids accidentally kicks the soccer ball / the football into either Minette or Mallory, I don't know which, and the kid, like, kneels down and is, from the looks of it, sincerely apologetic about the fact that he and the other children have caused some inconvenience to either Minette or Mallory. But then Minette and Mallory become very interesting very fast because a monster seemingly sprouts up out of nowhere, out of the ground, and starts attacking that boy, and then it is revealed very shortly after that that the monster does not actually exist. And said boy begins to bleed from his eye sockets, and and Minette and Mallory just kind of look on rather menacingly.
Menacingly!
But this is a very interesting turn of events for the characterizations of completely new characters. We know that these two girls are very eerie. We know that they are French, but now we not only have found out that they could summon a monster from the ground at will, but we immediately learned that it was not an actual monster and that this must be some sort of psychic telepathic torture ability that Minette and Mallory possess. So already, Minette and Mallory are the most interesting characters introduced in Kingdom of Monsters without question. They completely and utterly befoul the entire introduction of President Ogden. None of the popular culture in America joke knockoff characters even hold a candle to this. Anyway, let's fast forward. Later on in the issue, we see the French school children once again playing soccer/football, except this time they are doing it on a beach. And you know, some of the writers' hatred for the youth bleeds through, and one of the boys kicks the soccer/football over a sandy knoll/a sandy hill. And we finally get some dialogue from Minette and Mallory, who for some reason, despite the fact that they either tortured or straight up mentally killed one of their fellow students earlier in the issue, they walk over the hill so that they can presumably get the ball and bring it back to the rest of the class. And they utter some mental telepathic communication to each other. One of them says, "It belongs to us, doesn't it, Minette?" And then Minette responds, "Yes, Mallory, it is ours." And one of the only positive twists in the writing of Kingdom of Monsters is the fact that they stumble upon a giant egg similar to Mothra's egg, except anyone who is familiar with what Mothra's egg typically looks like, upon reading this for the first time, as I did when this comic first came out, was like, oh snap, whose egg could this be? And there was only one logical answer, which was, this must be Battra's egg. And considering how menacing and unnerving Minette and Mallory had acted up until this point in the comic, that was a pretty reasonable jump in logic, but I actually praise the comic for that in this instance, because anyone like me who grew up watching the Heisei Godzilla movies on VHS tape, it was always very odd that Battra did not have his own pairing of twins, much like Mothra's fairies, the Shobijin. So automatically this gained points with me because I was like, okay, so we're not mocking anything politically or socio-culturally now. This is actually building upon the lore of the established Godzilla franchise. President Ogden gets told that they found the egg, and there's like a mass death of some breed of moth. I don't really want to go into any of that, but you know, that's interesting, I guess. Basically, all that really served to do was to introduce to the reader the notion that Battra's egg, spoiler alert because we do find out that it is Battra's egg, has been made known to the international community. So the French military sets up a military blockade around Battra's egg, even though I guess at this point in the comic, monsters are showing up left and right, so I don't know if that's necessarily the safest thing they could have done, but the soldiers kind of tried to hold back the crowds from Battra's egg, and one of the French soldiers remarks that they're going to blow Battra's egg to Kingdom Come. And so Minette and Mallory remarked through their telepathic communications with one another that, quote, they want to take it, they want to hurt it, we can't let them, we won't, it is ours. So this introduces something very interesting because at this point, technically we do not know whether it is a Battra egg, a Mothra egg, or some other radically new moth creature egg. So we have to give it the benefit of the doubt, unlike most of the other writing in Kingdom of Monsters up until this point. Minette and Mallory press through the military blockade, and one of the soldiers tells them, hey kids, I said stay back.
You're dark, Raj.
I don't care.
And Minette and Mallory just cause all of them to die on the spot in a very similar way to the kid who played soccer in their second introductory scene, as there is some blood coming from their mouths and from their eyes, and it isn't explicitly stated, but I'm pretty sure the implication here is that Minette and Mallory just killed all of these French soldiers, which gives them, for the record, tremendous psychic power, because the only other psychic in the franchise up until this point, to my knowledge, was Miki Sagusa from the Heisei movies, and even Miki really didn't do this much damage with her powers on screen. She tried to psychically interface with Godzilla, and that ended poorly. Obviously, she did not end up being able to influence him in any way within Godzilla vs. Biollante, and she kind of lifts a metal table off the ground in Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla once she is kidnapped, but she never outright shuts off the brain activity of any number of people, including one by itself. So the fact that Minette and Mallory are not only showing to us that they are not afraid of using their psychic powers to torture other people, such as their fellow children students, but even despite the fact that they are children, they are capable of causing the mental shutdown and physical torture of several grown French men who are soldiers in the French military. So, I'm not familiar with how the French military kind of trains its soldiers up. As an American, I am only really familiar with how American soldiers are trained because I have known a number of guys in real life who have gone into the American military, and obviously I have seen military movies like Full Metal Jacket.
Because I am hard, you will not like me. But the more you hate me, the more you will learn. I am hard, but I am fair.
Or Platoon.
Death? Well, you all know about death.
So I don't necessarily know how hardy mentally French soldiers are, but I would assume it's in the same ballpark. So the fact is, these two adolescent female psychics are capable of killing multiple men at once. So can you tell just by the way I'm talking about this? Minette and Mallory are much more interesting as characters than pretty much anything else that was or is introduced in the future within the pages of Godzilla Kingdom of Monsters. So Battra breaks out of its egg, which is pretty coincidental considering Minette and Mallory killed all those soldiers and walked up to the egg, and Battra just immediately hatched. But the interesting thing to note here is that one of or both of the twins mutter through psychic communication, presumably to Battra itself / himself, "You are ours, and your name will be Battra." So Minette and Mallory name Battra here. I mean, we know that very real people in our own reality are the ones who named Battra, but it's interesting that they are technically the ones that named Battra here. But I want to draw particular focus to the fact that they say, "You are ours." It is interesting that Minette and Mallory, if they are the twins of Battra particularly, are very different from the Mothra fairies / the Shobijin. Mothra's fairies are always portrayed as very benevolent, very holy, very mysterious, but not in a sadistic or negative way. They always get captured, and they never use their abilities to wreak havoc on the very humans that transgress them. It is worth noting that at the end of issue 3, there is a tease where some old man in a shack sees Battra breaking out of its egg on live television and utters to an unseen entity at first that this is not right at all. Something has gone horribly wrong. And he turns back to look at what is presumed to be Mothra's fairies sitting on top of a stack of books while they hold hands, as is typical of Mothra's fairies. And it is worth noting here that I believe one of the writers for Godzilla Kingdom of Monsters went on record to say that originally this was planned to be Mothra's fairies, but for some reason or another, presumably writing restrictions put upon the creative team for the comic by Toho Company Limited, that these are actually just two random Hawaiian hula girl dolls on this guy's desk. This guy never shows up again. The fairies never show up again because obviously, I guess technically within the canon of the comic, this ended up being retconned into some crazy old man just talking to two dolls on his desk. But if we blow past that and kind of just ignore that as Toho Company Limited making an asinine move / judgment call on the story of the comic, then we can presume that these are the Shobijin and they are noticing something very wrong / out of place with the appearance of Battra in this world. Now, the reason I bring this up is that for all of the very shoddy writing present in Godzilla Kingdom of Monsters, Minette and Mallory have a very strong set of introductory scenes, and some of their baseline non-dialogue communicated characteristics are very interesting because Mothra's fairies are always shown as being comically small, you know, like approximately the height of this bottle of D3 pills that I take every day. Maybe a little taller, maybe about as tall as my phone. Whereas Minette and Mallory are pretty much just bog standard height for female children of French ethnicity of a certain age. So just by the mere contrast between the heights of the Shobijin and the heights of Battra, we know something is different about the Heralds of Battra as opposed to and in comparison with the Guardians / the Heralds of Mothra. But we also know from the behavior of Minette and Mallory that they are very not nice, and though Battra was not a straight up villain in Godzilla and Mothra The Battle for Earth, the actions of Minette and Mallory in this comic, as well as their heavy association with Battra, really makes one question what the nature of Battra will be within this comic. It should be noted that at this point, Minette and Mallory kind of shift to a more out and out villainous role because the French military tries to take on the larval form of Battra, and Minette and Mallory just telepathically command Battra to use its horn beam to blow up one of the tanks, and then they iterate, "Now we will take you to Paris and you will make us queens." This is a very interesting development for Minette and Mallory as far as characterization. I do think that it is a little rough and they could have done maybe a better job of introducing us to this, but Minette and Mallory are clearly just using Battra's power for their own ends. Specifically, they want Battra to help them become queens. And queen obviously is a very particular role of power. And it could be more deep than even I am iterating right now. I do not know a whole lot about French political history and the kind of history with France's royalty, aside from the fact that the French Revolution the French may have not lost their heads regarding the French royalty, but the French royalty definitely lost their heads over all of that. So just from that perspective, the fact that Minette and Mallory in modern day France want to become queens is very interesting. That is not something that the comic directly commentates on, nor really fleshes out, but I wanted to bring it up because I thought it was interesting. Then Battra shows up in Paris and kind of cuddles with the Eiffel Tower, and Minette and Mallory take advantage of the fact that Paris has been evacuated and they raid what looks to be like a toy store, and they dress themselves up in queen robes, royal robes, and they put on crowns, but they remark that it's too bad these aren't real crowns. Yes, queens should have real crowns. Let us get real crowns. And then they tell Battra to stay put while they go off to the museum to get real crowns. So already we are getting further confirmation that Minette and Mallory are very different from Mothra's twins, because Mothra's twins would never break into a place, at least based on what we have been shown in the movies that were released up until this point in 2011. So not only are Minette and Mallory basically directly commanding Battra, they are also commanding Battra such that they can commit crimes according to mankind's legal standards, the standards of which are the French ones in this case. I know I just said it, but again, I do think it's worth pointing out that Minette and Mallory are basically telling Battra what to to do, whereas the impression I always got from Mothra's fairies was that they didn't really tell Mothra what to do. They pretty much just listened to Mothra and acted sort of as interpreters between regular mankind and Mothra herself. Minette and Mallory seem to have a very more active role in their relationship with the moth in question. The moth, of course, in this case being Battra. Then Minette and Mallory go to, again, forgive me if this is the incorrect pronunciation, the Louvre, and a bunch of soldiers are just talking to each other saying, yeah, we have to protect the museum from the looters, and Minette and Mallory basically chat amongst themselves through psychic communication. Do we need tickets, Minette? And Minette responds, no, Mallory, we are the queens of France. Queens don't need tickets to go to a museum. And then they show another terrifying display of their powers, which is they cause at least 5 different French soldiers to drop dead. Again, it is not explicitly said that they die, but I mean, what else are we supposed to presume from what is shown to us? There's plenty of blood and they fall to the ground, and we know that Minette and Mallory at this point have tremendous psychic capacities because they are commanding Battra to do things. So, I mean, the body count just keeps piling up. At this point, if we presume that the kid that kicked the soccer/football at the beginning didn't die, Minette and Mallory have a body count of at least 13 different grown men at this point. And we can include the young child boy who apologized sincerely as number 14 if we want to go that route, because I don't think it's really that much of a leap in logic to presume that he also died, but that also raises questions about how Minette and Mallory were not in any way suspected of foul play, considering their history of troublemaking at French educational institutions. But then we get the art style shift in the next issue, which is completely unrelated to this, but then Minette and Mallory are seen breaking through glass at the Louvre to get real crowns and real royal dresses/royal robes, as well as royal scepters of some kind. And the issue focuses a lot on Rodan, who has appeared and done stuff in Russia for a couple of issues, which will become relevant in a second because Minette and Mallory return to the site of the base of the Eiffel Tower, where Battra is shown cocooning itself against the Eiffel Tower, which is very interesting. I know it's not technically related to Minette and Mallory, but in Battle for Earth, Battra basically just transformed in a burst of light into its imago/adult form. And Minette and Mallory, upon seeing Battra cocooning itself like this, are confused. One of them says, is he dead? The other one says, no, he's not dead. He's not Battra anymore. He's changing. And then the other one says, has he left us? And Mallory says, no, Battra will never leave us. Most important of which is that somehow Battra is able to cocoon itself, despite the fact that in no movies prior to the release of this comic was Battra ever shown shooting webs, which are of course necessary for the development of a cocoon. But we also know that Minette and Mallory are not so connected to Battra that they for some reason would know about its capability to transform into an imago. But again, they assert ownership of Battra and claim that Battra will never leave us, quote. So the dynamic between Minette, Mallory, and Battra is very interesting, which is more than I can say for a lot of the characters introduced within the pages of the Godzilla Kingdom of Monsters comic. Then Minette and Mallory, for some reason, just do not show up in one of the issues. They're completely absent from issue 6, but then they show back up in issue 7, and that issue is the issue which this particular panel/crop panel comes from. And Mallory says to Minette, you know, it's such a nice day, and Mallory says, every day is nice when you are are a queen. And based on the dialogue, I guess maybe Mallory is the more dominant of the two in the pairing, because Minette seems to ask a lot of questions and seems to very much be subordinate to Mallory. Then they have a brief discussion about how it's impossible to be queens of anything if you do not have any subjects, and obviously Paris was evacuated. But then Rodan shows up and starts destroying the city, and just before that, Mallory states, "When Battra wakes up, we will find all the people and everyone will do what we say." Which is interesting because, again, it makes it out that Minette and Mallory very much want control over other people, so Battra himself is not the goal in and of itself. Then Minette, I presume, asks, "But when will Battra wake up? It's been so long." So presumably we didn't see them in the last issue because that was kind of meant to indicate that Minette and Mallory have been running the abandoned streets of Paris during the time we have not seen them. And Rodan tries to attack Battra, who hatches into his adult form, but Minette and Mallory do not like the fact that they are fighting, so they command both Battra and Rodan to stop fighting, which works. So even though we know at this point that Battra has some sort of psychic connection to Minette and Mallory, we now know that they also have such tremendous power that they are capable of putting a stop to a conflict between two of the kaiju within literal minutes/seconds of meeting a new one. Like, they do not have any psychic connection to Rodan as of the moment when he attacks Paris in this issue. So the fact that they so easily get a hold of him, so to speak, is interesting. Then things take an interesting turn because Minette and Mallory say that they wish to gain control over the king of the monsters, which obviously is Godzilla. So Minette and Mallory basically mount Battra and Rodan and fly off to the United States to gain ownership/control over Godzilla. I'll kind of speed up at this point. Minette and Mallory basically stop being characterized at this point, and they fly to the United States and they try to gain control over Godzilla. But Godzilla is, as in Godzilla vs. Biollante featuring Miki Sagusa, too powerful to be psychically influenced, in this case by Minette and Mallory. And at first, Minette and Mallory think, oh, well, that's just because Godzilla got his butt handed to him in combat, so we need to recharge him. So they have Battra and Rodan basically drop Godzilla onto a nuclear reactor, and then Battra shoots its prism I-beams into the nuclear reactor, causing it to explode, and Godzilla is recharged. And Minette and Mallory think that they finally have Godzilla under their control, and then Godzilla basically flouts their control outright and gets into a beatdown between him, Rodan, and Battra. It's also interesting to note that just prior to recharging Godzilla, Minette and Mallory basically ask Godzilla, "Are you sick? Are you deaf?" Which is funny considering they're communicating with Godzilla non-verbally through psychic communication, so asking if he is deaf is kind of funny under that lens. But it is interesting that Godzilla outright flouts their commands, and they get indignant about that fact. As far as Kingdom of Monsters is concerned, that's basically all I have to say about Minette and Mallory in terms of filling you in on the details about them and what is necessary to be known about them within the context of this comic. It is very obvious that Minette and Mallory were seen as some of the only things worth dredging out of the corpse of this comic run, because Minette and Mallory did actually show back up in the Godzilla Rulers of Earth comic. I will not be covering their characterization and their involvement with the plot of that series in this video, so if this video becomes very popular and I figure out a new way to record videos and figure out a new schedule for releasing content after starting this new job of mine, I could maybe do that, but really all I have to say within the context of this video about that iteration of the characters is that I'm not surprised, because they were pretty much the best thing within the Godzilla Kingdom of Monsters comic run in terms of characterization. Now, obviously, I do think that considering that Minette and Mallory were made to be the villains of the Kingdom of Monsters comic in a de facto sort of sense, it should be said that villains are typically only as good as their opposing heroes. You know, Spider-Man within the Sam Raimi trilogy of Spider-Man movies is really only as good as his villains, because Spider-Man 1 and Spider-Man 2 had Norman Osborn / the Green Goblin and Otto Octavius / Dr. Octopus respectively, and those villains really elevated the material due to their kind of relationship with the hero. And Manette and Mallory do not really have much of a relationship, if a relationship at all, with Stephen Woods, who most people would probably cite as the central protagonist character of Godzilla Kingdom of Monsters. For those of you who don't know who Stephen Woods is, I referred to him in a previous video as the Godzilla franchise Diet John Rambo character, and that's part of the problem, I guess, if you can really cite any problems with Manette and Mallory, is that they have no relationship, thematically or personally, with Stephen Woods, which I feel like would have been necessary to really elevate Manette and Mallory to truly goated status. Otherwise, they're very interesting for the fact that they are French, and they're pretty much alternate versions of the Mothra fairies, but they're normal kids, at least to start. Obviously, they eventually grow into adults, but if you can't tell based on my demeanor and my manner of speaking in this video, there's a lot more to like about Manette and Mallory than most of the characters we have previously covered within Kingdom of Crap. This is basically going to be the last episode I record before I start my new job in the Kingdom of Crap comic review series, but it is worth noting that technically I could also cover Stephen Woods, who was the protagonist of Kingdom of Monsters, who did show back up in Godzilla Rulers of Earth as well. As I mentioned with Philippe and Monique, I think there's something to be said about the fact that they were specifically chosen and specifically written as French children. Not only is there something here, but I feel like there is a tremendous depth for where they could have taken these characters. Now, it is worth noting that from what I remember and from what I could surmise from glossing over the Wikizilla summarizations of Manette and Mallory's issue appearances in Godzilla Rulers of Earth, they really seem to steer into the notion that Manette and Mallory are power hungry and want to rule over things. Fitting, considering they want to be rulers of Earth. But whatever they ended up doing with Rulers of Earth, which I honestly cannot remember, it has to be said that they could have only done it through setting up the characters decently within the pages of Kingdom of Monsters. So, you know, kudos to Eric Powell and Tracy Marsh for doing that, because it's pretty much the only thing that survived this comic run that I have anything resoundingly positive to remark to you, the humble viewer. Anyways, that about covers it. Like I said, in your past, my present / my future, things are going to be changing for me very shortly. I might record one more video to kind of fill the week that this video comes out, but if I've done that, you've already seen it. Plus, I also probably have another video to record that will be coming out on December 27th of last year, so I cannot say for sure or for certain at this point when the next upload will be coming or what it will be. I know I do have plenty of YouTube shorts slated to come out on Wednesday at 3 p.m. like I have been doing, but I'm probably just going to let that kind of stream of YouTube shorts kind of flow out. I'll empty the jug, so to speak. Drop a like if you enjoyed this video. If I need to do that bonus episode on Stephen Woods, drop a comment in the comment section below telling me how you feel about Manette and Mallory, both generally as a concept, but also specifically in regards to how they were handled within Kingdom of Monsters. And if you have any comments to make about the Rulers of Earth versions of those characters, feel free to drop those too. Anyway, that about does it for me for at least today. Show some love to all of my past video content and kind of tell me what you want to see more of from me, if indeed you do. And should I find the time between my new job and making videos and editing and recording them on the side, I will try to do those. And if I do, I will catch you there on the flip side.
This is the end.